Welcome to the Unconditionally Worthy podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Adia Gooden, a licensed clinical psychologist who believes deeply that you are worthy unconditionally. Hello, and welcome to episode 22 of the Unconditionally Worthy podcast. I'm excited that you're here listening, and we have an amazing episode for you today. I am talking with Dr. Candice Norcott, who is a colleague, a fellow licensed clinical psychologist, and a friend. Candice is sharing her wisdom, her professional expertise around trauma. She talks about powerful metaphors that she uses with clients on their healing journey, and we discuss the intersections between trauma and self-worth. It's really an insightful and powerful conversation that you're going to want to listen to. Let's get into the show. Hello, and welcome to the Unconditionally Worthy podcast. I am so excited to have my friend and colleague, Dr. Candice Norcott, here with me today. She is a licensed clinical psychologist at the University of Chicago in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Neuroscience, where she is an assistant professor, national consultant, and public speaker. Candice is a graduate of Brown University and the University of Connecticut. She completed her pre- and postdoctoral work at Yale University's Department of Psychiatry, where her research focused on gender and trauma. Candice works as an assistant professor at the University of Chicago, and in this role, her work encompasses providing trauma-informed reproductive health services to adolescent girls and young women. And she is also the director of graduate medical education well-being for the University of Chicago, where she brings her trauma-informed approach to resident physician well-being. Candice speaks internationally on issues related to trauma, gender, and race. She was recently featured on the Lifetime docuseries Surviving R. Kelly and was a guest on Jada Pinkett Smith's Red Table Talk as an expert discussing the impact of sexual abuse on girls and young women and the intersection of race. Throughout her career, Candice has been committed to trauma-informed and gender-responsive services for girls and women, minority advancement in psychology, and cultural responsiveness in the health field. So I hope you all can see why I'm so excited to have Candice here with me today. I think, we're in a world where a lot of people are talking about trauma, a lot of people are talking about gender-based violence, but there aren't as many people with the sort of academic, personal, professional wisdom about these topics. And so I'm really excited for Candice to share her wisdom with us, to drop some knowledge that we really can learn and understand some of these intersections between trauma and self-worth. So, and also Candice is just a real cool person. She's a great person to be around and spend time with. So Candice, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm happy to be here. Excited.
Awesome. So I'm going to start with a question that I ask all of my guests, which is if you could tell us a little bit about your own self-worth journey.
I was thinking about that question as you were reading the bio. I think for many professionals that have to put together a CV, or anybody that has to put together a CV or bio and then have it read back, that in and of itself is a bit of a journey to kind of sit in your accomplishments and comfortably in your accomplishments. So I think that's certainly part of my journey, feeling like I can not be overly or falsely humble and just kind of feel good and get value out of that. So that's kind of what's running through my mind as you were reading that. I was like, I'm a lot more comfortable hearing this than I would have been maybe 10 years ago. So I think that that's part of the journey. And for me, I think self-worth is being able to stand in my own life and stand in the things that I'm passionate about and having it bring contentment to me. I always laugh with with my best friend, because when I never really understand social media. I've never really understood social media. So when it was first coming into my life, right, as an adult, as a young adult, I really thought that that's what it was. And my friend would be like, they're curating that. That's not. And I'm like, well, and it just kind of, it it really fostered a sense of comparison for me.
Mm,
And
mm,
it took away, and I really had to work on my relationship with comparison,
mm,
with my journey, my path, and being able to, find value in that in a void, right? Like if I'm alone in a forest, do I still feel like I'm doing good work?
mm,
I'm leading a meaningful life, and I'm making a contribution to the world.
mhm,
And that took work. And I feel like social media in some ways was like the perfect kryptonite for me to test
mm.
that as like my weakness, like my weak spot in my container and in my life. And it's still hard for me. It's always something I have to keep an eye on. But yeah, so really standing in the value of my experience in my life.
Mm. Yeah, I love all of what you just said, starting from the sort of owning your accomplishments and sort of being comfortable. I know I still get a little squeamish when people are reading my bio because it's like, "Ugh," but feeling like, yeah, I did that. That is something I did. That is something I've contributed. And owning that is so powerful. And then I think, what you're saying about comparing and sort of, feeling like maybe we're not measuring up or questioning what we're contributing because we're comparing is
Mm.
something that I certainly resonate with. I know so many people resonate with that, especially as it relates to social media, but sort of owning your own life and feeling good about it and content about it and appreciating it, not in comparison, not as something's better or worse from anyone else, but as your life and your journey. I think that's such a wonderful way of framing self-worth.
Yeah, there's always going to be something or someone that's doing something different than you, right? And it's only us that puts a value that's better or worse,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And if you can develop a healthy like rubric for yourself, then that's I think the best gift, right? Does this align with my values? Does this align with how I see my role in this world? I know that's kind of like gets a little like woo woo, but how ultimately do I want to leave a space once I've been there?
Mm-hmm.
And have I done that?
Yeah, I think that's really important, right? What is your internal barometer? What are your own values, right, for this work? And how does that guide you versus comparing yourself? And I think, a lot of times comparison comes from a sense of, I'm not totally content in how I feel about myself or what's going on in my life. And I look at somebody else and they seem happy, at least on the outside or at least on social media. So maybe if I had what they had, I would feel happy too. Right. And it's sort of
Yeah,
this search in the external for really work that we need to do on the inside.
absolutely. I mean, and we're going to talk a bit today about trauma, and I think that you know I love that word barometer, but and trauma disrupts that. It
Mm,
disrupts your sense of being able to trust that you
mm,
can see what's healthy, that you can really choose well for yourself, and it totally disrupts your confidence in that. And so
mm.
then you yield to that external measuring, those external barometers.
Yeah. Wow. That's really compelling. I'd love for you to share more about kind of how you see trauma as an expert in the field. How do you see and think about trauma? Because the word is thrown around a lot these days. And so I think it would be good to have some grounding for our conversation.
Hmm. Well, I think I often battle with people that are looking for a very like concrete, like this is trauma, this isn't trauma, because it would be nice if things were that black and white. But in a lot of in a lot of mental health and what we do with people, we kind of steer them away from black and white, right? Because
Mhm.
needing and the desire to create simple distinctions and clear distinctions actually can cause more suffering. But um, I generally think of trauma as events or experiences that completely overwhelm one's ability to cope and adjust.
Mm,
And so, because of that, something that is traumatic to one person may not have any impact or little impact on somebody else. And so, it allows for diversity in experience, which also I think confuses people sometimes because
mm,
somebody will say, well, I grew up in that same neighborhood and I didn't come out that way, or that happened to me and I'm not. Or somebody who's a survivor will say, what's wrong with me that I'm struggling so hard with this, but other people have had this happen and they're seemingly thriving, right? There's that comparison again. They're seemingly thriving. So when I'm asked to offer kind of a definition for trauma, I think that's one that kind of captures the most meaning for me when I'm talking to people about what trauma is.
Yeah, I really appreciate that because it centers the person and their experience of what happened versus this is how you should or shouldn't respond given that. And I think we could also think about, what are the buffers that they had? What are the challenges that they had before, right? There's so much that goes into whether someone's ability to cope with a situation becomes overwhelmed by a traumatic experience. And it's not as simple as this is what happened in that moment. It's the whole context of that person, their life, the supports they've had or not had previously, where they were at that point in their life. I imagine there's a whole host of things that you think about when conceptualizing trauma with a client or helping someone to make sense of why they were overwhelmed and why a certain experience was so difficult for them.
And some people that have experienced being overwhelmed like that had a pre-existing identity or self-identity that was empowered, powerful, impervious, right? They didn't see themselves as being somebody who, as victim. And so it really, it requires a rebuilding and a rewriting of a lot of narratives about themselves. And there are lots of ways to get at that work. But sometimes just deciding that that's the work that needs to happen is hard. I mean, not many of us would willingly want to walk into having to rewrite our stories.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work, and it requires letting go of a lot of assumptions that may have been, whether they were real, based in reality or not. They certainly felt safe because they were what we knew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or maybe identities are things that we thought were going to protect us that didn't. And then how do you orient if some of these things didn't protect you? Yeah. And I appreciate you saying the piece about sort of identity construction. And I imagine a lot of the work you do is around people sort of coming back to themselves, reorienting to how they see themselves. And I wonder if you could share a little bit more about that.
Well, we already talked about how people's experience of events and stressful events, toxic stressors, is unique and kind of, there's diversity there. There are some common themes. And so when you're coping and your ability to cope is overwhelmed, common feelings are helplessness, hopelessness, vulnerability, lack of safety. It impacts how you see the world. And so oftentimes what I do with my clients is I kind of go back and say, well, what were kind of constructs, right? What were constructs that might not have been true, right? And so how do we accept the world as it is? And instead of wishing that it was different or wishing that things didn't happen that did happen, how do we then free up that space so you can move in this world that now you're in, that you've accepted, where you have agency again, where you can also acknowledge that although you were overwhelmed, you still had some instincts that made you safe, right? And one of the things about people is that their memories get disrupted because they're really trying not to think about the event at all or the experience at all. And so they tend to, in addition to not thinking about the horrible parts of their experience, they also don't remember the ways in which maybe they did fight back, or, they threatened my family and I wanted to protect my family, or they threatened my life. So, I believed them, right? But instead they're spending their time blaming themselves for not calling out for help, and so we don't construct a fake story, but we construct a full story together. And And, that's, I think, when we, again, like sitting in my life, right? When we accept the entirety of who we are and what we've experienced, we can see it for what it is. And I think that there's power in that, right?
Yeah.
There's realness in that. It has substance. And so we're not trying, one of the things about, there's this whole area of literature about post-traumatic growth, right? And, a misnomer or a misunderstanding about post-traumatic growth is that it's saying that good things can come from trauma. And that's really not what it's saying, right? Like, people aren't necessarily happier after a traumatic experience. However, they may have skills and tools they can use that they didn't have before. So, we would never say you're better off, right? However, it is, you can still have a horrible experience and have skills and tools now that you can use moving forward. Both can be true, right? And when you can sit in the, the duality, right? Sometimes the dialect of that, you're just moving from a more substantive space that can just benefit your recovery and benefit the way you see yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the phrase a full story, right? Like, we're crafting a full story, and that full story can include, this is what happened. This is the context of what happened. This is what you did to protect yourself. This is right. And also, this is what you learned on your journey. And I think there's so many connections between creating a full story and self-worth and feeling worthy, because I think a lot of times when people experience trauma, and I really want to hear your thoughts on this, there can be an internalization in a sense of, I'm not worthy because I experienced this trauma, or I experienced this trauma because I'm not worthy. And sort of this sort of internalization that, it was my fault, or I should have done something different, or, all of these things which are so painful, and the shame that people experience with it. And I think this constructing a full story, owning the growth that you experience, owning what you did to protect yourself or, advocate, is really powerful. So I'd love to just hear your thoughts on sort of the intersections between experiencing trauma and self-worth.
And I don't have to tell you, I mean, this is so central to what you do, but shame is such a hurdle as you kind of work towards self-worth, right? Like, painful memories, painful things that you've experienced, that you've done, right? Things, decisions that you've made, that people that you've hurt potentially by your decisions, right? And it becomes this hurdle that just grows because we don't talk about it. We don't, we feel like we're unlovable because of it. And so, I talked a bit about avoidance and some of the changes in the way you see the world, but people often, so I work a lot with cisgender women, and what is common for women is that over the course of their lifetime, from childhood to adulthood, it's not uncommon to find a pattern of violence where they experience violence and victimization at the hands of people that they're in relation to. So people that they know, that likely people that are saying I love you to them, and that they're saying I love you too, right? And it's not about comparison, but there's a unique profile that emerges, that if the people who are closest to you are the ones that are hurting you, it is not a huge leap to say, what's going on with me that this is happening to me over the course of my life. Right. And then also when you think about, for Black girls and women, you also are having all of these societal messages saying that you're worthless, that you're violent, that you are, you really are you're devalued, you have no value in our society. I do a lot of work from a relational health foundation, or theoretical foundation. And the idea basically is that we thrive in connection. And trauma disconnects, right? You feel like there's something wrong with you. You isolate. I don't want to be around people. They hurt me. I hurt people. And so you never get these corrective experiences with other people, so that you get to say, those things happen to me, but they're not because of me. And I can build, or I can learn, or I can have experiences that are positive, but and I can learn how to do that. I didn't have that growing up, but I can learn how to do that, which is why therapy, can be so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
But because relationships are so important and we thrive and we yearn for them, right? There's also this thing in the back of our head that says, "Oh, like what if I'm not going to? What if there's something wrong with me?
Mm-hmm.
What if the thing I yearn for is not for me, or if I'm not going to be able to get it, and I don't want to risk it? What if I ruin it, right?" And so then when you layer on top of that trauma over your lifetime, when you layer on top of that stereotypes and tropes and negative messages from society, um, it it becomes, you start to say like, wow, how do people have self-worth? When people kind of are sitting in their power, you're just like, damn, that's the result of a lot of hard work.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And some more than others, but many people have to really work at this
Yeah.
and and do it. And it's intentional, constant work. And it's great work. But it's really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree. It is work. It can be hard work, painful work, challenging work. And of course, I think it's worth it. But I think what you said about trauma causing disconnection and the importance of being in relationship is so powerful, right? Because I think when people feel unworthy, when people feel unsafe in relationship, I think especially is what you described, if you're, a person who's experienced trauma at the hands of people who were lovers, family, friends, right? That it would make relationships feel unsafe, right? You don't know when you might experience some violence or assault. And then you respond to that by maybe withdrawing to protect yourself or putting a wall up to keep people out. And then, that's helpful. That can be helpful and safe with those people who are harming you. And then when you're ready to be in relationship with other people, that becomes so hard, right? Then they may sort of say, okay, well, you don't want to connect, so I'll go the other way. And you may then say, well, see, I'm right. People don't like me. See, I'm right. People don't want to connect, right? And I also think that relates to one of the powers of therapy, which is, as therapists, it's our job to keep showing up for the client no matter what they come in with, right? It's like you come in not wanting to talk. Okay, I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
You come in angry. Okay, I'm here, right? You come in sobbing and crying. I'm here, right? And I think that is I think people are understanding more now what therapy does, but one of the powers is having this person who shows up for you. No matter what, right? Like, yes, I mean, there's some like boundaries, right? But generally it's like, all your mess, I'm here with you. I'm not turning away in horror. I'm not running away scared. I'm here, right? Like you can bring all you got and I'll be here. And how powerful and healing that can be for someone who worries deep down that they're unworthy or has had this trauma and, maybe relational trauma and feels like no one was going to love me or no one can accept me and might push back against a therapist. I'm sure we both have had clients who like test the I'm here, I will be here. And it can be such a wonderful, powerful thing when clients sort of start to trust you and start to say, okay, like I've been pushing it. I've been pushing them away and they are not running. Yeah.
The dynamic is so layered and so multifactorial because many people, this comes up a lot. Like I said, I work a lot with women, and what comes up a lot is they're emotionally putting up these boundaries and being kind of guarded, but they're physically in relationships. And many people are so focused on keeping themselves kind of like emotionally safe, and that they will it doesn't matter necessarily where their body is or who they're relating to. They're just really hyper internally focused. And then something that comes up a lot too is that they're they get some form of safety or comfort from somebody because of their experiences of trauma. And that, because they're getting that one type, they'll put up with a lot of other stuff.
Mm.
because they're getting that one type of safety that was so threatened when they were victimized.
Mm.
And so because they're getting that externally, they'll kind of put up with a lot to keep that thing. And part of the work becomes, how do you generate your own sense of emotional and physical safety? How do you generate connection wholly,
Mm-hmm.
both with yourself, starting with yourself, and then with the people that really are around you and you trust and that deserve it? And again, that goes back to the barometer. People don't trust themselves that they'll be able to really identify that. And
Mm.
so you take baby steps, right? You take baby steps with them. Well, you've been talking with me for a while. Like, what's your sense of our relationship? Here's what I think. So there's some alignment there. Do you trust yourself here?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What would it be like to take relationship risks in our space?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And sometimes people need permission to say what's on their mind.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so I'll say, if I say something that you don't like, I hope, I want to invite you to tell me. Or I'll say, looks like you didn't like what I just said. Like, share.
Mm-hmm.
Or sometimes, I'm not perfect. If I make a gaffe, or if I say something, if I have to cancel for, a personal reason, which is not ideal, but happens, right? We're all human. I'll say, what was that like for you? It was last minute,
Mm-hmm.
you know? Yeah. So just, I can take it. Like, you can share that with me,
Yeah.
and that's part of the work too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think what you're really demonstrating and giving such wonderful examples of are the power of the therapeutic relationship and using that, right? I think often people are like, well, I'm just talking, or I'm just learning coping skills. And certainly those two things are really valuable parts of therapy. And there is so much power in the therapeutic relationship, which is this unique opportunity to process what's happening and test and take risks and talk about it in a way that is often much harder to do in our other relationships, because people may not be interested in our feedback or what we have to say or any of those things.
Mm-hmm. I have to say, one of the biggest growths for me, in parallel with feeling like I'm working at this craft of therapy, is that I just feel like such a better friend.
Mm.
And because I really have those conversations in real with the people I love too,
Yeah.
right? Like, if somebody says that something that I did that bothered them, I just listen, right? And I'm like, yeah, I did do that. What can I do? And it's a little bit of like, I like to move with integrity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm going to suggest or encourage people to do something, I really want to be doing it myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I believe in it. I really do believe that this kind of communication and, attention to our relationships makes for meaningful life. And I feel like I one of my values, and one of the ways that I live in alignment with my values, is being a good friend, being a good, if you're in my, my network, my, even in just my physical environment, I want you to feel better because I'm around.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's just,
Yeah.
and, of course, that's mutual. I'm not going to do that to somebody who's like giving me the finger, but.
Right. But I love that. And I think there's also sort of these connections with self-worth as well, because to me, when you're grounded in your worth, or I know when I'm grounded in my worth, it's easier for me to accept feedback and not down spiral into I'm an awful human being. And right. And I think we've all sort of given someone feedback before, and then they down spiral, and then you end up being like, it's okay. No. Right. Like, and then you're comforting them because you told them about a thing they did to you that was hurt. Right. And so it's like, when you're grounded in your self-worth, when you practice self-compassion, it's so much easier to like breathe and say, okay, like I did something that wasn't great. Doesn't mean I'm an awful human being, that I'm the worst, that I just, I should just walk away and shame. It means like, okay, like I need to repair, make amends, apologize, do something differently. And I can do that because my self-worth isn't at stake, because I know that, I'm a good enough human being and I'm trying and I'm going to make mistakes along the way, and that's okay.
Yeah. And before people have turned the corner to their healing, towards their healing, people often spiral down into the center of their trauma, which is, I deserve what I got. It was my fault. I'm unlovable. So feedback, criticism, is taken as confirmation of my rottenness, my rotten core.
Yeah.
And when you turn the corner to your recovery, you see that feedback, or you make that feedback be part of your expansion and your recovery and your building, right? And your evolution. Because even if somebody is saying something that it doesn't mean it could still hurt, but you can extract from it something that you can grow from. And that's where, that's your autonomy, right? You can choose to do that. And before you've kind of turned the corner on that towards recovery, everything is just reinvesting and it's just feeding into this sense that yep, there's something I should have been on top of this. I should have known I was this bad, and this person shouldn't have surprised me with that, right? So
Yep.
it's my fault because I should have already been thinking about how bad I am.
Yeah.
You surprised me, right?
Yeah.
And it's the wrong kind of place where we want them existing.
Yeah.
It's unhealthy. There's no right or wrong, but it's also not useful.
Yeah. Makes it feel worse, right? Because then comes all the self-criticism and the beating yourself up and, all of those things, which just exacerbate, your feelings, not feeling safe, feeling like you're worthless, all of those things. So yeah.
You cannot make good decisions for yourself or anybody else from a place of shame.
Yes.
You cannot do it.
Yes. You should put that on a quote card and post it on Instagram. Because, it's so true, because people think if I shame myself, I'll shame myself into being a better person. And it does not work. You will shame yourself into being a miserable person, but you cannot shame yourself into being a better person, into helping anyone. It's not helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't do it.
So, I think we've been touching on it a little bit, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about, maybe specific things, work that you do with clients when you're supporting them in healing from trauma that you think would also help people on their self-worth journeys.
Many of my clients, I joke about it at this point. I'm like a sucker for a metaphor. I mix metaphors. Sometimes I have to hold myself back. One of my clients once said, yeah, you got a lot of them today. Like you're really today's a heavy metaphor. I was like,
Popping them out.
Yeah, for sure. So I think in some ways it's just how my brain works, is like images but narrative, I think a lot in stories, in metaphors, and in scripts, right? And messages. So, I really, in my early work with people, I try to identify what are the scripts that play in your life, right? That are basically just getting rewritten on a pad over and over again with different characters, right? So you're just doing the same script. And then where do they come from? Are they scripts that they want to keep investing in, or did they belong to somebody where they gifted and then they want to kind of give them back? And a lot of times it's a both. Right. There are scripts about women, women know what they're getting into. It's their fault if they find themselves in an abusive relationship. It's well, where did that come from? And is that helpful for me right now? No, that's not a script. So helping people identify and figure out what they want to keep and leave. Something else that comes up a lot, is, I find this useful. My clients might say differently. They might just be nodding and smiling as they're talking. But, when I think about trauma, I often kind of just share that I think about like, we're weaving this tapestry, right, of our lives. And we've picked out, like, we have our color scheme, we have our sense of how we want it to be, but then we get kind of given this really gross color, this really kind of like a different fabric or something, and we have to weave it in. And I share that with people because oftentimes they come into therapy saying, I want to get over this, I want to get past this. And it's with you, right? It is part of your tapestry, it's part of your story. How you weave it in is where you have autonomy and is where you have power. And so I work with people to say, like, how do we want this to be in your story, in your tapestry? And that, I think, serves as like a useful metaphor. And also when people are like, what are we doing in therapy? Or like, what's therapy? I'm like, well, this, and I think that becomes, it just lets people loosen their grip. It lets people kind of just take a deep breath and relax and know that it's going to be an ongoing creation.
Yeah. I love that. I think what a beautiful metaphor. I do a lot of acceptance and commitment therapy. So the piece I think about is acceptance, right? Like, it helps people to accept it. And I imagine using the word acceptance when you're helping someone heal with trauma, like, it probably like gets a lot of resistance because it's like, how can I accept this? Right. That's people, it's like, why would I accept something awful? But using the idea of like, yeah, you didn't have a choice about this thread being on the spool or whatever. It was, it's like you unspooled it, seemed like a great color. Turns out it was not in the color scheme and you don't like it and you don't have a choice. You can't switch it. And it's so beautiful. So it's like, yeah, how are you going to work with it? Right. And you can acknowledge like it sucks and it's frustrating and it's not the pattern you wanted. And we can sort of acknowledge and, grieve that and also say, and you got to keep weaving. And sort of also, I like the idea of like, there will be a period where that takes up a lot of space, right? Where that like, part with that color that you don't like takes a lot of space. And then there'll be just threads that get thinner. And then maybe there'll be a period where you almost can't see it. And then maybe it'll get bigger again because something happens. Right. But I love that it's such a usable, workable metaphor that can help people make sense of the journey of healing, the ups and downs, the fact that it isn't linear and the fact that it isn't always controllable, right? There are things that you can do to help yourself along the way, but you can't cut this thread and just be like done with it. It doesn't work that way.
And people talk a lot about feeling stuck, right? That trauma makes them feel stuck or they feel stuck in this experience. And in addition to the experience, it's the grappling. Why did this happen to me? It shouldn't have happened to me. I wish it didn't, if I had gone down this. And so that's the piece where they're like, I don't want to weave this in. I don't want to have to use this.
Yeah.
And like, and I love what I love the way you just said, it's like, you have to keep weaving.
Yeah.
Like you have to. And you just don't get to see like what is coming out, but that it's still, you're still going.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I think that's a really very powerful metaphor. Very, very powerful metaphor. I love that. And I also love the scripts piece. It feels like such a good way to help people sort of take a step back and observe the pattern, right? Because I think that's, often our job as therapists is like, what's the pattern? And sometimes it can be hard to point out to clients the pattern without sort of like, while you're not wanting them to feel judged or criticized, like how do you point out? But if you're saying, hey, take a step back with me, like what script do you notice playing out? Does this sound familiar? Like what role are you playing? I think that's such a useful way to get people, again, I'm using my like ACT lingo, into this sort of observer point of view to say, okay, what script am I writing? Do I still want to play in this script? I'm tired of this role. How can I get out of this role? Do I have agency to say, I'm not playing this role anymore? And what does that look like? So I love those. I love those metaphors as powerful things that people can just like think about and try on with the things that they are working with personally?
Yeah, one of the most common is like the script of control.
Mm,
And, I, and so getting people to kind of see how they're holding on to this idea of control. And it's like people
mm,
get a lot of messages about control and what we have control over and not. But, there's a reason why it's all over like substance use disorder treatment and things like that.
mhm,
But kind of helping people to sit with, you know, you'd rather blame yourself and
mm,
you'd rather continue with this script of blaming yourself because feeling out of control feels really scary.
yeah,
Feeling that there are things that that could happen to you
yeah,
that, even tomorrow feels too, but it was always this way.
yeah,
And so again, it's not about writing a rosy script, but it's one in which it's rooted in reality
mhm.
and the duality of just the way our life is, or maybe not duality, but just the multifaceted nature of
Yeah,
like our
complexity.
experiences. Yeah,
Mhm.
complexity.
Yeah, yeah, and part of it is sort of reckoning with the fact that you weren't as safe as you thought you were, which is hard.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. A long, long time ago, and I'll be very generic, but I was working with somebody that really had held this idea that his identity um, protected him.
Mm.
And when victimized, despite
Mm.
his identity, it was devastating.
Mm.
And really having to rebuild, like, I was always at risk. I was never protected. And what does that mean about how I see the world now?
Mm.
In a way that could still, where somebody could still feel like they have some agency, and
Right. Yeah. It's a challenge.
it's
I mean,
work.
it's totally, yeah, it can be world changing and completely
Mm-hmm.
disorienting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you've said so much that's been helpful. As we wrap up, I'm wondering if you have maybe a tip or an insight or maybe a takeaway that you want to emphasize to people as they're thinking about their own self-worth journeys, or if people are on their healing journeys from trauma.
A tip. Um, People can feel like, uh, let me start, I think, more. I want to start more direct because I think sometimes you deserve
Mm,
to recover,
mm,
you deserve to reconnect, and you deserve to feel safe.
mm,
And you also have everything within you to do those things for yourself with help, right? With help. Um, and I would offer people that are feeling like, I don't want to tell anybody, I want to get over this, I want to forget about it. Um, that they don't have anything to be ashamed about, and it's the shame and the guilt that is going to cause the sickness.
mm,
And the telling and the connecting is what's going to help them recover and heal.
mm. That was so powerful. That was really, really powerful. Thank you. Thank you so much. I know that people are going to want to connect with you. Candice shares so many great videos, whether they're interviews with other people or her own sort of tips around kind of mental health and coping. So you'll definitely want to follow her on Instagram and connect with her further. So, Candice, will you just tell people how they can connect with you and stay in touch?
On Twitter and on Instagram, I'm at Dr. Norcott, at DrNorcott. I have a YouTube channel that needs so much love and tenderness and tending to, but it's there. So if somebody wants to check out some of my videos, if they prefer YouTube, they can also check me out, Dr. Norcott, on YouTube as well.
Awesome. And we'll link all of that in the show notes. So thank you again. This was such a wonderful conversation. And I know it's going to be so helpful to everyone who listens. So I appreciate you being here. And yeah, thank you.
I appreciate you. I love everything you're doing. I think you're just amazing. I appreciate your friendship and our collaboration and our partnership. And so I think you're great. Keep going. I love seeing it.
Thank you.